Hello, and welcome to Unity of Fredericksburg. My name is Chris, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you to the Unity of Fredericksburg weekly online gathering. At Unity of Fredericksburg, we're advancing the movement of spiritual awakening and transformation through unity, a positive path for spiritual living. We thank those of you watching on YouTube, live or later, and invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're able to attend live, we encourage you to join us in the Zoom community room for the full Sunday morning experience. It includes music, prayer, and connection. Our weekly newsletter includes the Sunday service link, and you can subscribe to receive that on our website at uofva.org. For everyone local to Central Virginia, Unity of Fredericksburg offers a variety of fun and enriching experiences. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter at uofva.org for all the details. Our message today comes from Reverend Cheryl Fair, our minister. And now, here's Reverend Cheryl.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, 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 everyone. Whether you're watching live or later, we recognize you and appreciate the energy that you bring to this spiritual community, Unity of Fredericksburg. Our broadcast date today is January 14th, so it's still the beginning of the year. I hope you will pardon me. I have a few New Year jokes to share with you first. All right. So, what do you call always having a date for New Year's Eve? Social Security. I was going to quit all my bad habits for the new year, but then I remembered nobody likes a quitter. And one more. I made a New Year's resolution to lose 10 pounds. Only 15 pounds to go. So, anyway, just to get our funny bones warmed up, today's message today is going to be focused on the Unity of Fredericksburg theme for 2024, which is well-being. Well-being is what is going to be our focus for 2024. So what is well-being? You know, I like to start with some definitions, like what are we talking about? Well, an online search reveals that well-being is a complex combination of a person's physical, mental, emotional, and social health factors. And of course, since we are a spiritual center, let's add in spiritual, shall we? Well-being is strongly linked to happiness and life satisfaction. Well-being could be described as how you feel about yourself and your life. Now, our process for coming up with our theme started with different collections of people having discussions about what we would like to focus on for 2024. And we had a couple of Zoom sessions that I called Dream the Theme, where we talked about well-being, and folks from the community who showed up shared their definitions of well-being. So this is what people in our Unity of Fredericksburg community had to say about well-being. They defined it as balance, inner peace, surrender, full of life, safe and secure, open to awe. Isn't that an interesting one? So what we did as a part of the Dream the Theme process is we identified a series of aspects of well-being, because we know that well-being is, we can describe our well-being in our physical life, our spiritual life, our emotional life. So as we go through 2024, each month we will have a different focus as we talk about well-being. So this month, it being January, we are starting with the spiritual foundations of well-being. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And since tomorrow is the National Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, we're also going to look at how King's foundation of spiritual well-being was evident in his life's work. So we'll definitely be bringing in the MLK holiday. So we're going to begin with what I'm calling the spiritual building blocks. And that's a phrase that I'm very fond of, the building blocks of well-being. And I'm going to talk about 3 of them here today: oneness, goodness, and life. So let's get started. The first concept, the first building block of well-being that I want to talk about is oneness. So in Unity, and for those who participate on Zoom, you know that later on in the service, after we get past the message and the meditation, we do have a statement of oneness that we say together. And we talk about the one presence and the one power active in our lives and in the universe. So this principle of oneness assures us that we are not separate from the energy of the universe. We are an expression of that energy. So I have a little quote to read from you. It is from the new book from Reverend Linda Martella Whitsett, and her co-author on this book is Deanne Weir Morency. It's called Discover Your Divinity. I definitely suggest it as having that on your reading shelf for this year. And here she is talking about oneness. Oneness means there is one and only one true power in all life. Whether you name it divine mind, spirit, God, consciousness, or the universe, oneness by its very nature is indivisible. There's nothing that can be separate or outside of it. Oneness cannot be split or dual. It is whole always. And if nothing is outside of oneness, you cannot be separate from oneness. All are one, even as the one may be experienced and understood in infinite ways. So there's a nice description of what we're talking about, oneness. Now, when it comes to our human lives, the degree to which we are aware of that oneness will be reflected in our sense of well-being. Makes sense, right? So if you're feeling lonely, separate, broken in some way, then you are not in alignment with this concept, this principle of oneness. And the more we have a spiritual practice that reminds us, that shifts our focus to our divine nature, where we are aware of oneness, the more we can do that, the more we can have a sense of well-being. When I get lost in the challenges of my life and I forget, because I'm dealing with all my stuff, I forget that I am one with the one, then I can lose track of my sense of well-being. But when I shift my attention to my divine nature, I experience well-being even as I navigate the challenges in my life. I can recognize the challenges. I can support myself and others through the human activity while still staying anchored in this principle of oneness. And I know that my oneness is not diminished by any outer circumstances. Say I'm injured or I'm feeling well, that doesn't minimize oneness. My wholeness and oneness is still fully present, even while I am working through the process of healing. And of course, the more we recognize oneness and that everyone else is also an expression of this oneness, the more we can experience well-being in our relationships with others. So I have another quote for you. It's from this amazing book called See No Stranger. Let me read it, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. This is by an author named Valerie Kaur. And here's a quote from her book. What has been an ancient spiritual truth is now increasingly verified by science. We are all indivisibly part of one another. We share a common ancestry with everyone and everything alive on Earth. The air we breathe contains atoms that have passed through the lungs of ancestors long dead. Our bodies are composed of the same elements created deep inside the furnaces of long dead stars. We can look upon the face of anyone or anything around us and say, as a moral declaration and a spiritual, cosmological, and biological fact, you are a part of me. Isn't that great? So, the more we can lean into this realization of oneness, the more we can experience well-being. So that's spiritual building block number one. Spiritual building block number two, we're going to talk about is goodness. So again, referring to this statement of oneness that is used in many unity centers, and you'll find the wording to be different in different centers. How we say it here at Unity of Fredericksburg, and this of course happens in the Zoom portion of our service. So if you are someone who watches on YouTube, we do encourage you to reach out to us and ask for the Zoom link so that you can be with us for the whole service. What we do with YouTube is we just post the message and meditation, but we have a full service that happens that includes music. And so the statement of oneness we use is there is one presence and one power active in my life and in the universe. God, goodness, omnipotence. So we name that one presence and one power as God. And some of us like to use that word. We also name it in that statement as goodness. And what we mean by that is the benevolent energy of the universe. That energy that we see coming forth in wonderful ways in relationships and as puppies and flowers and all of these things, and that goodness, that energy is present and expressing through every circumstance, even when it's a chaotic circumstance. So the primary reason that we use this word goodness in unity, or good, depending on what ministry you're at, goodness, is that we want to make sure that everyone understands that we do not acknowledge a power that is opposite of God, because many religious scenes will do that, and they will talk about an entity that is the opposite of God. And this is unity. We're talking about oneness. So we do not talk about an opposite of. So we don't talk about an adversary or anything like that. And we also don't talk about a lack of God in any circumstance. We know that in our human brains, we can fail to recognize sometimes, but we are affirming that this energy of the universe is goodness in expression. Nothing and no one is against us. Here's a quote that helps bring this all together. This is from Ernest Holmes in Science of Mind. We must instill into the mind the fundamental proposition that good is without bounds. We must get this concept rather than continuing to think there is a power of evil as opposed to the power of good. We experience good and evil when we perceive a presence of duality rather than unity. Now, of course, we're not saying that there are not people in the world that cannot act in evil ways. We are not saying that. We are not saying that everything in our human world is good. But we're talking about the energy of the universe. In oneness, there is no absence, no opposite, no separation. And we need to realize that we are a part of this goodness. So there is not good or God and you. because we already talked about oneness. There is only God, there is only goodness. So, and when we say God, goodness, omnipotence, we recognize that this power of goodness is our power to stand in our spiritual truth through any of our earthly challenges. Now, again, I want to say this is not to say that our human challenges will be few or that it'll be easy to see the good in different circumstances that we experience or when we look out at the world. And I do want to urge you to be gentle with yourself, because don't we all have those moments where we're in so much pain, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain, whatever it is that we're happening, that it is, it becomes impossible for us to recognize the good. Be gentle with yourself. This does not represent a spiritual failure. This represents you needing to be in the experience that you're having in your human life and be gentle and work through it. And very often, after we go through something that's difficult, we're able to look back and recognize how goodness, how God mind, how divine love was expressing through that. So just know that the more we are willing to claim the good in our own consciousness, the more we will recognize it in the outer world, and the more this will enhance our sense of well-being. One more quote in this part of my talk. This is from Emily Cady in Lessons in Truth. God is not a being or person having life, intelligence, love, and power. God is that invisible, intangible, but very real something we call life. God is perfect love and infinite power. God is the total of these, the total of all good, whether manifested or unexpressed. All right, so we've talked about oneness, we've talked about goodness, and the third spiritual building block I want to talk about today is life. And I'm talking about the power of life. So this is one of the 12 powers, which is a teaching set that was created by Unity founder Charles Fillmore. And our power of life is the animated vitality, the presence of universal divine mind that is always expressing through us as us. Here's a quote from Charles Fillmore in his book, Keep a True Lent. The first step in the realization of life is always to know that God is life, abundant, omnipresent, eternal. And the second step is to make positive connection with God life by declaring oneness with it. Isn't it great how all these spiritual building blocks weave together as we are in that awareness of oneness, as we are claiming our good, as we are recognizing this power of life that is expressing through all of our circumstances, the more we can realize our own well-being. So this divine energy of life is always expressing, and we recognize it in our human lives in so many ways. So just the cycle of the seasons, depending on where you live and how weather shows up. I remember in particular the year when um, things were pretty well locked down because of COVID, and people were staying in their homes and not going grocery shopping, all these kinds of things. And yet outside my window, spring was happening. Spring was exploding in glorious colors. That energy of life was happening even when our human lives seemed very limited and very restricted at that moment. And even if when we look at other natural cycles in the natural world. So forest fires can seem so amazingly devastating. And yet, um, even after a landscape is cleared by a fire, it doesn't take long before little shoots of new growth start popping up, and all of the nutrients from the, burned natural products, start feeding the soil. So these kinds of cycles, we know about them in our lives. Even we know that in ourselves. If you look back, one of the things I like to say is, look at you. You've made it through every worst day of your life. And we've all been to that point where we're really, really having a struggle. And yet, we might spend a good amount of time in the bed or on the sofa, and yet our very being will start to bubble and spark, and eventually we find ourselves getting up and taking the next step. And that impulse to live and to do, this is a part of us. It's in our bodies, right? Our bodies want to live, right? So even when we're having the worst day possible, most of the time, unless it's a medical thing, is we are, our hearts keep beating even when we are grieving. Our bodies keep breathing even without us trying, right? Most of the time, unless there's a medical emergency, and most of the time our bodies heal on their own. When we get a cut finger, we don't have to, be in, a desperate state of praying, praying, praying for healing, because our body knows what to do. The cells in our body know how to knit themselves back together and come back into perfection. And that activity is this power of life. So I have a quote here to kind of wrap up this part of talking about the power of life. It's one you may have heard before from Albert Camus, a French philosopher, author, and journalist. And he said, "In the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." So, as we recognize the power of life in our spirit, mind, heart, and body, we enhance our sense of well-being. So those are the three spiritual building blocks I want to share with you today. We talked about oneness, goodness, and life, and I haven't forgotten that we're going to talk about the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., of course, a leader who devoted his life to working for the well-being of all people, especially African Americans, through racial and social justice. And one of the things that made him such a powerful speaker and inspirational leader is that he did everything from a firm foundation of his spiritual beliefs. And that came through in his talks, and that came through in his choices and his actions. He anchored everything that he did in his understanding of God and goodness and the right of all people to enjoy well-being in all aspects of life. Now, if you look at, I spent some time doing some research yesterday, and if you look at quotes from Dr. King, and if you look at transcripts of his speeches, and I encourage you to take some time to do that tomorrow, because it really is very inspirational and meaningful. There are themes that come up regularly with King. And we're talking about spiritual themes, of course. And what I see as I look through the material that I was looking at are themes of faith, hope, love, and gratitude. So here are some quotes from Dr. King. "This is our hope. With faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. Here's another quote where he talks about faith. Faith is the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. Isn't that true? Here's another short one. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And here's one more along that theme of love. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. And in his last speech, delivered in support of striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, on April the 3rd, 1968, this is the day before he was assassinated, Dr. King told the story of a letter he received after he had been stabbed in the chest at a book signing some years before. He was told by the doctors at the time, and it was reported in the press, that the knife that he had been stabbed with had been so close to the aorta that if he had sneezed, he would have died instantly. And here's what he said about one letter that he received, and this is from the transcript of his final speech. There was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at the letter and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School," she said. "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I am a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering, and I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. And I'm simply writing you to say, I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze." And here's King saying, "And I want to say tonight, I want to say that I am happy that I didn't sneeze." And what he does with the end of his speech, and you'll find it if you look it up online, he then goes into a whole list of things that he's grateful for. So there's that theme of gratitude. And he lists one by one things, accomplishments that had been made in the movement he was working on, and connections he had made with people, and all of these things. And so it's just so inspiring to see that everything that he did was anchored in spirit and focused on faith, hope, love, and gratitude. And this was his spiritual foundation of his sense of well-being, despite all of the turmoil going on around him. And when you read that final speech, you see he was very aware of how dangerous his circumstances were. And he closes this final speech by saying, "And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." So, talk about an amazing demonstration of being anchored in spirit. So, and these kind of spiritual building blocks, foundations, are the things that we can anchor our well-being to, and walk with that kind of inspiration, inspired by Dr. King, that he anchored his well-being in his divine nature and claimed it was good. So as we begin our year focusing on well-being, I encourage you to go forward looking at these principles of oneness, goodness, and life. And I am certain we are going to have a wonderful year together. So as we move into our time of meditation, I have another quote to read from you for you today. It's from a gentleman named Scott Aubrey. He is a Center for Spiritual Living minister. So let's just take a deep breath. Just kind of move into the stillness, quieting the mind, opening the heart. Let's listen to this quote from Scott Aubrey. Poets, philosophers, and scientists alike say that the source of all life, all expressions, is one. That at the core of us all, there is a universal energy. As we embrace this truth, we say yes to the invitation of a new day that allows the spiritual qualities of unity, equality, and justice to rise into the collective consciousness of humankind. So, if you wish, I invite you to allow your eyes to drift closed or just soften. And in your mind's eye, see this activity of oneness and goodness and life. Feel this quality of well-being expressing in you all through your body, through all of your connections and interactions. Feel this quality expressing in your love, in how you connect with others through your family, friends, communities. Feel this quality of well-being expressing throughout the world, through all the nations of the world, and feel this quality of well-being expressing in the earth itself and all of its inhabitants. So let's just focus on that. Perhaps you might give it a color or emotion or something that you feel as you focus on this expression of well-being, of unity, of oneness, goodness, and life. And let us just move into the stillness for a few minutes together, right here, right now. And as we begin to bring our attention back to the current moment, just recognize that activity of the power of life. It just continues happening within your body without you having to direct it or guide it. The heart is beating smoothly, the lungs are breathing, the blood is circulating, and all the cells of your body understand their foundation is expressing that power of life. So as we recognize that power of life and our connectedness with the principles of oneness and goodness, let us close this time together with an affirmation. Here's our affirmation for today. I like to put my hand right on my heart space so I'm feeling it in my body, in my heart, as well as in my intellect. Here it is, and then you can repeat it after me there at home. Well-being is my true nature, and I am grateful. Let's say it again. Well-being is my true nature, and I am grateful. Just keep your mic off at home, friends, and say it one more time. Well-being is my true nature, and I am grateful. So it is. That's it for me, friends, and I'm going to hand it back to Chris, our service leader.
Beautiful, beautiful message. Thanks for watching the weekly broadcast from Unity of Fredericksburg. Visit our website, uofva.org, to learn more about our mission of spiritual awakening and transformation. You can also support our ministry with your financial donation. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time.